how about our second presentation is going to be Harry Wolf. He has spoken to us before. One trip was about Everest Base Camp, and he had done that with Shay and Bill. And this is, that was a pack paddle and ski trip, and so is this. And Harry is going to share his screen with you about Canyonlands National Park.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me. And this trip is a lot different than the Williams family's trip. Many of you may have been to Canyonlands National Park, and I'd like to use my theme of imagine a place to introduce you to the park, and then talk a little bit about the actual hikes that we did enjoy. So imagine a place where ancient native civilization left on the canyon walls their rock art. And archaeologists and art historians have all said that within Canyonlands National Park are some of the finest and best preserved representations of this type of art. And I will talk more about that art in a minute. Imagine a place where outlaws were able to elude the law. The place is so remote that the outlaws were able to live in these caves out of the sight of the law. And in fact, famously, Butch Cassidy's gang, the Wild Bunch, lived in a place called Robber's Roost in a section of Canyonlands Park. We visited a cave that had been lived in by a couple of bank robbers in the 1920s, and they were able to live and sustain themselves. They did have visitors and people who supplied them with what they needed to live, but it took a long time for the law to find people in this vast desert wilderness. So imagine a place that's 527 square miles. It's part of the Colorado Plateau, and it's called the High Desert. And the high desert is a term that meteorologists often use to describe an area where the unique and moderate weather that occurs in this desert-like environment. Very different from a very hot and arid desert. The highest point in Canyonlands is 7,200 feet above sea level, and the lowest point is 3,700 feet above sea level, and that's where the Colorado River flows through this park. It is, of the big 5 national parks in Utah, it is the largest. It's bigger than Arches, Bryce, Capitol. It is, in fact, however, the least visited park of the national parks in Utah. It averages about 700,000 visitors a year. And 97% of those visitors are going to a specific point very close to the town of Moab, Utah, called Island in the Sky. And the reason why most visitors go to Island in the Sky is not only because the views are spectacular, but of the hundreds of miles of roads within Canyonlands National Park, only 20 are paved, and those 20 take you to Island in the Sky. It is a very dry, arid, dusty place. It is not a place for your family car, although there are miles of relatively flat, not paved, but flat dirt roads. It's extremely dusty. And you really need to do a lot of driving within the park to get to the hiking spots that you want to visit. And in fact, the closest part of the park, at least where we entered, was from the town of Green River. And to get into a place called Horseshoe Canyon took, it was a 50-mile trip on dirt roads to just get there. And it is definitely a place where you would want to have a high clearance, four-wheel drive, and every kind of emergency type of equipment you might need to rescue yourself should you get stuck in this park. A little bit of movie trivia for those who are into movies. In the climactic ending scene of the movie Thelma and Louise, where they drive off the top of a canyon wall into the Colorado River, that supposedly takes place in Grand Canyon. However, that was filmed just on the boundary of Canyonlands National Park. And so it's a place that's actually a state park. Again, the closest state park to the little town of Moab. And just a little bit of trivia for you. The interesting thing also about this area, and there's the Colorado, but let's go back here. The soil is biologically alive, and that is why Canyonlands is not one big sand dune. By biologically alive, there actually are small bacteria and algae and fungus that live in the soil. And when it's arid and dry, they're dormant. But whenever there's any kind of moisture or rain that occurs, these bacteria actually form clumps. And those clumps aggregate into an area that actually stabilizes the soil. And as a result, the soil is protected from blowing away, not only in the wind, but also from the work of erosion. So I found that to be a fascinating fact as to why Canyonlands looks like it does. Now, in this picture, you're looking at both a butte and a mesa. And a butte is a hill or a small mountain, which is flat on top, but it is steep on all sides. So you're looking at a butte on the right-hand side, and then again, in the distance on the left-hand side. And then way in the background is a mesa, and a mesa is essentially also a flat top mountain with at least one side that is very steep. Now, this picture is of the Colorado River, and Canyonlands has two rivers which flow through it, which are responsible for much of its current shape. That's the Colorado and the Green River. And the Green River flows into the Colorado a little bit north of here. This picture was actually not taken in Canyonlands Park, but we were outside the park and stopped to take a look at the Colorado. So here's the team. I met up with these folks at a campground just inside Green River. And that's Rick on the left, Laura, Lainey, Jama, and Carol, and myself. And Rick and Jama actually had been there the week before with both Lainey and Carol, and they had been in Capitol Reef National Park doing some rappelling and slot canyoning. And I met up with them on a Saturday morning. I chose to drive to Utah from Fairport. And I did that because we were still in the middle of the pandemic. And I was not interested in getting on an airplane. And frankly, I don't mind driving thousands of miles in the car. And so it took me 3 days because I'm not a night driver. So I get up early in the morning and drive 500 or 600 miles and stop for the day. But actually, during the pandemic, the roads were empty, the hotels were empty. It was actually quite pleasant. And unlike the folks who flew into Salt Lake City and flew out of Salt Lake City, nobody knew I even existed as I drove across the country, and nobody really cared. Whereas if you flew, then you were filling out all sorts of forms. And when you got back to Rochester, you were being told you were going to be arrested if you left your house after 2 weeks. So logistically, this was a series of day trips. And in order to get from point to point, Rick and Jama had rented this pickup truck. Was a large pickup truck. 6 of us fit into the cab area, and everything that we needed for essentially 4 or 5 days was in the back of that truck. And it all came out of the truck every day, and then all went back into the truck each day as we would move from place to place. And you would think that why would you need a bicycle in Canyonlands National Park? But Rick and Jamer brought that along, and actually it came in very useful on one of our day trips. And by the way, water was extremely precious, and all of this is water. And we went through water very quickly. And I don't know how many gallons of water we started with, but when it's hot and dry, you're drinking and you're cooking with it. And it's a precious commodity because for 5 days, other than the Colorado River, we didn't see any water. And there again is just a bunch of gear. And we all brought our own tents, and we spent 2 nights at the camping area at Horseshoe Canyon. Otherwise, we were moving day to day, and the tents came down and were packed up, and then they came out at the end of the day and put back up. And we did that each day for 4 or 5 days. The interesting thing was that Rick and Jama slept in the back of the truck. So they bedded down each night in the back of the pickup truck. And there's just a peek into my Big Agnes seed house. These tents are rated for 2 people, but I personally love just being in there by myself. Not a whole lot of room for 2 people. So it's dinner time, and we are at a campsite called the Neck, which was a very narrow strip of land that was sided on both sides by hundreds of feet of descent, sheer descent. You can't tell in this picture just how steep. About 6 feet from Jama, it just drops off into nothingness. And but looks like tonight we're having burritos, if I remember correctly. And Rick and Jama are wonderful backcountry cooks. I'm sure many of you have been on their trips and enjoyed eating with them, but we did not want for good food. And there was plenty of time for quiet contemplation. So again, this park is just magnificent when you just look out at the creation of it and think about the eons of time. And at one point, there had to be a lot of water here, but there certainly isn't any now. And we had just beautiful weather the entire time we were out there. So this is another butte, if you will, at a different campsite. I believe this was Sunset Point Campground. And at all of these various campgrounds within the park, we needed a permit to camp. And each of these campsites was pretty much your own there. We did not, other than Horseshoe Canyon, we did not camp within sight of anybody else. So it was a place to be one with nature and just take in the grand sight. Another butte. All of these have names, and I don't remember the name of this one. And you're looking out over an area, and you'll notice down here along the bottom of the valley here, that is the road. And we are currently a number of hundred of feet above that road, but eventually we will get down there. And we were headed to our next camping area, but I happened to be on the wrong side of the car for this particular trip. And I'm not a big fan of heights when there isn't a guardrail. And these roads were just amazingly rough. And there were places where I was looking out the window and there was just nothingness next to me. And I know the rest of the folks got a big kick out of that, but I wasn't exactly happy. An interesting sign along the road. There was a cattle ranch that we crossed, and the farmer had left this notice to leave the cattle alone. They are not wild and they're not yours. And again, back at the cave that was used by the outlaws of the 1920s, bank robbers who had escaped and figured this was a great place to hang out. And there was way in the back of the cave evidence of wood that had been used for campfires, cooking fires. And that brings us to Horseshoe Canyon. And the interesting thing about Horseshoe Canyon is that it is a separate part of Canyonlands National Park. Canyonlands National Park was made a national park by Lyndon Johnson in 1964, I believe. And Horseshoe Canyon was annexed to the park in 1971. And Horseshoe Canyon initially had been called Barrier Canyon. And this is where the Native American rock art, or pictographs, if you will, were on the walls. So in order to get to the pictographs, it required a hike of 3.5 miles and a descent of about 600-700 feet. So I'm looking down right to the point where we eventually will wind up. The trails were actually not bad. A lot of rock, a lot of slick rock, and switchbacks. So while it looked like we were heading down a long way, it really didn't take that long to get down. And this is the Great Gallery. And this, as I said, is the best preserved panels of ancient art in this area. And just as a definitional point, these rock art or pictographs are different from petroglyphs. Those words are not interchangeable. A petroglyph actually is rock art that you actually scrape or incise into the rock, as opposed to a pictogram, which is merely paint on the walls of the canyon. And this art is ascribed to a desert archaic culture. They were nomads, they were hunter-gatherers. they did not build permanent structures. And it's at some point in their history, it is thought that they turned to shamanism, meaning they had individuals that they imbued with supernatural powers, and that this art is part of that religious activity. Most of this paint is kind of a dark red pigment. The representations are human-like, but no one really has any arms. The bodies all taper, and it is thought that this was a representation of their shamans. But there's still a lot of disagreement among the archaeologists and art historians. They indicate that these paintings were made somewhere between 1500 and 4,000 years ago. And they really aren't sure. So there's still quite a bit of disagreement. Many of these are larger than life size, and you'll see that in a moment as well. And these pictographs were quite high on the wall, and you would wonder, well, what happened over the eons? How did they get up to paint these pictures? And at one time, there was a shelf here. And you can see the rubble here. And over time, the shelf just continued to crumble due to wind and erosion. And so the pictures are actually in a number of places quite high on the walls. But at one point, they were able to just stand there and make these paintings. As you can see the shelf here again, that pretty much they must have stood on. And then there was a shelf here, which is why these have been so well preserved, because over the millennia, this shelf protected the artwork here. And just various different figures. It is said that the ones with horns were the supernatural beings. There are a number of animals, small animals. This one is holding a snake over here. And this is actually a representation of a dog. And there were also some pictures of small birds and other animals. But we spent quite a bit of time just gazing here at this rather remarkable artifact from many years ago. And so of course Rick and Jama had to get up there up close and personal, and now you can see that how large some of these are in comparison to their size. Very interesting. And in this canyon, there were also wild burros. Probably the largest animals that we saw, which we really didn't see a lot of animals, but we were told that these burros did live in the canyon. And we were also told not to get very close to them because they were not friendly animals. And so this set of 3 burros was just kind of looking at us as we were looking at them. And then there's the maze. Now, as I indicated earlier, there are 700,000 visitors to Canyonlands National Park every year. Only 3% come to this place. It is the most remote. It is the most challenging to get to. It's the most isolated. The roads are absolutely unbelievable. I believe we drove 15, 20 miles, and it might have taken us 2 hours. It's just get out of the car. Jama was constantly jumping out of the car to check and see where Rick's wheels were going to be. It is slow. It is, I was I was just amazed that we were where we were and what we were doing. And but the maze is quite an amazing place. It's only 30 square miles, but it's sheer walled canyons, and there are also pictographs within the maze as well. So here's the overlook of the maze, and we are headed down there. And on most of my hikes, I like to be on solid ground. Sloping ground is great, but I'm not a big fan of sheer drop-offs. I'm not a big fan of putting my feet over a wall and not seeing where they're going, but that was what the conditions were getting down into the maze. And this formation up here is called chocolate drops. And it's just an amazing remote place. We did not see anyone else until we came back up at the end of the hike. But this is the relatively mild part. And then we kind of walked across this slanting rock here. That's me back there holding on for dear life. And this is just straight down into oblivion here. Laura actually was brave enough to ask Rick for his hand, and I got brave when we came back, and Jama became my best bud because this was just a bit above my pay grade. And then there was this. We came to a number of drop-offs that were 20, 30 feet descent. And again, this is not exactly my comfort zone, but when you are with Rick and Jama, they make even the most uncomfortable situations comfortable. And this is not a butte, it's a butt, and I apologize for that. Most of my pictures are of the backsides of people. I just seem to be below everyone when I was taking these pictures, but here I am coming down, and it's interesting to look at this slick rock wall and see the indentations that have become part of the wall over the hundreds of years that even the natives way back when were using this to get up and down into the maze, and the rock just got worn away over a long period of time. But this is what makes the uncomfortable comfortable, is you got Rick and Jama, and Laura and I had harnesses on. Lainey and Carol were expert canyoneers, so they were able to do this without rope. And but I was not going down unless I was roped in. And this would not be a place that I would even attempt to do on my own, or even with people who just aren't as experienced. So and then Rick and Jama coming down, and some really tight spots here too in the maze. So we spent the better part of a day in the maze, and again saw some artwork that was on the walls, and successfully. Actually, it's a lot easier to come out than it is to go down. When you're going up, you can see where to put your hands and feet. And I again was roped up and happy to be harnessed, but it was a lot easier to come up than it was to go down. And then there were some slot canyons that we enjoyed. And again, a slot canyon is something I had never been in before, so I used my butt quite a bit, but the slick rock was interesting. And after a while, you got used to the fact that it was, in fact, not slippery rock, and that you could put your hands and feet down and get a really solid grip on things. but I had no problem reaching out for a hand when it was necessary. We found a skeleton, most probably of a mule deer, as we were heading down into this slot canyon. And we looked up at one point and saw this bridge. The bridge had numerous holes in it, and I believe I was told that it was a sheep bridge that a cattle rancher would use to drive his cattle or sheep from one side of the canyon to the other. And we came out of that slot canyon, and then it was just, again, this big, wide, open desert, and walking back to the vehicle. To our slot canyons just south of Horseshoe Canyon is a canyon called Blue John Canyon. And Blue John Canyon is the slot canyon that Aaron Ralston, back earlier in the about 2003, was doing a solo slot canyon hike when a boulder fell on his arm. And I think most of you know how that story ended. Aaron wrote a book about being between a rock and a hard spot, and there was also a movie, 127 Hours, detailing his experience of extricating himself. But that was literally within the boundaries of Canyonlands Park as well. Chute Canyon Trailhead was not in Canyonlands National Park. It was actually outside a state park called Goblin Valley. And Chute Canyon was the last canyon that we walked in. And again, a very interesting spot. All of the canyons that we walked in were either gravelly or sandy. And the sides of these canyons just towered over you as you walked in. And there were quite a few lizards and other little creatures that lived in the walls, but beyond them and beyond the burrows, we didn't see a whole lot of wildlife. Just some amazing spots to be part of. This canyon just kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where you'd have to twist your body through to get through, and that was not on the agenda. And someone, not us, had decided that this needed a few rocks to make a Chute Canyon bumble. So I thought that was a good picture. With such a open, large area, the sunsets and the sunrises were all spectacular. And this was a sunset picture that I took when we were on the campsite called the Neck. And as I say, with all of the various trips that I have taken, to Kilimanjaro, to Everest Base Camp, Scotland, Machu Picchu, even the Adirondacks, our world is so different every place we go. And there's beauty to be found no matter where our feet take us. And this was the trip to Canyonlands National Park. I thank you all for listening.
Thanks, Harry. That was great. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Harry about this area? Anything in the chat? I think people have just been attending by watching the pictures. I know there are several people on the on attending the presentation who have also taken trips out there with Rick and Jama. So you're not the only one in this group tonight who has been out there. Anybody want to ask Harry anything? JB Fletcher is saying, was the drive one way or an in and out on the same road? This was beautiful and interesting.
The drive was not in and out on the same road. In fact, when we left Green River to head into both Moonshine Slot Canyon and then Horseshoe Canyon, we never came back on any of the same roads, except when we drove into the maze. We basically had to come back the same 20 or 30 miles to get to our campsite that night. But there was almost no repetition of roads. This is a huge place, and the fact that Rick and Jama even could navigate amazed me. There were very few road signs.
Lois Dannenberg says, thanks, Harry. Looks like a fascinating place. Jack
Indeed.
Schrader is asking, did you use cat holes or for toilets or outhouses?
The area at Canyonlands National, at Canyonlands Canyon, or Horseshoe Canyon, I'm sorry, at Horseshoe Canyon, there actually was a pit toilet that had been put up by the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management. And so we were at that area for 2 nights. But once we left, it was a pail and plastic bags. We needed to carry out everything, including any waste material that was produced. So yes, we carried everything out.
Okay. Miriam says your photography is amazing. Thank you. And
Thanks.
Don, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, Wiegand, asked, was there any concern about rattlesnakes, scorpions, or other pests?
Certainly they are present. There wasn't a lot of concern on my part, at least the places we were camping were well camped. In other words, we weren't clearing anything, and there was a lot of dirt. And we did one night at Horseshoe Canyon see a snake. It was not a rattlesnake. Rick attempted to, it had gone under a bush, and Rick was attempting to try to extricate it, but it didn't want to be extricated, and we didn't want to annoy it. So, but it was a very interesting snake. It was basically a white snake with black markings or black stripes. To me, it looked like a zebra snake, but I don't know my snakes. But so we did see one snake, but was really not concerned. There didn't seem to be any of the small creatures around. That one picture that I showed you of us eating at the neck, that was the one night where mice made themselves pretty obvious. They were running around under our feet once they knew that Rick was cooking burritos. So they must like burritos.
Okay. Annie has said, thanks for the trip deeper into Canyonlands. I am one of those who Chevy chased islands in the sky.
Okay.
And then Miriam asks, did you drive out with any water to spare?
No, actually, we literally used all of the water. And on Thursday of that week, we drove out to a town and actually got more water, gassed up the truck. And that's when we went into Goblin Valley, State Park area, and the next day we did Chute Canyon. So we actually needed to refill some water. I was just amazed at how much water we had when we started the trip, and that we went through it all.
That is amazing. Right now, there aren't any other notes in the chat box. Does anybody else have any questions for Harry or anything they'd like to say? We can kind of end the presentation, although we formally, and we can give a few more minutes for people to chat if they would like to, but let people feel free to close out their meeting and go on with their nights if they want. I would like to say, so let's see, Harry, I think you probably can stop sharing your screen, and then maybe we'll get the full gallery of pictures back. Oh, Jack Schrader is asking, what was the temperature day and night? What were the temperatures?
I had written down the temperatures each day. I kept notes on every day of the trip, and most mornings were in the low 40s, chilly, and it was windy a number of times. And during the day, as soon as the sun came up, you took off pretty much everything you had on, and it got up into the 70s. I don't remember it being much warmer than the high 70s. And the very last morning that we were near Chute Canyon, I wrote down, was the coldest morning. It had to be about 35 degrees.
Wow. It's a big temperature change during the day.
Yes.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was a unique trip compared to many others. It's not a place you would go without a lot of preparation and help.
Correct. It would not be a place other than driving to the island in the sky on the paved road to be with all of the other tourists that I would ever dream of going into. So, and in fact, my wife and I will be back in Moab, Utah in September. So we will go to the island of the sky, and we will drive through arches and do more of the touristy things. So, but it's a very unique area.
Yeah. We, when our son got married several years ago, he's been married over 10 years now, but he got married in Utah. And so then we went to several of the national parks. We didn't make it to Canyonlands, but we did Arches and Zion and Bryce. And we also had my mother-in-law in tow. So we didn't get to do nearly the hiking that we would like to do, but those are fabulous parks to explore. They're great. Anybody else been out? I know Shay and Bill go regularly out to Utah, or out west anyway. I know you guys have spent your time there. You want to give us any thoughts about that?
Yeah, actually, Utah has gotten like way too crowded for us.
Really?
Yeah, if you can barely squeeze yourself into a place like Zion,
Capitol Reef,
or Capitol Reef,
Yeah.
which is a
Wow.
lovely place to go to. Yeah, in fact, later this year, we're going to be going to, I guess what I would call the second string of national parks up in the Pacific Northwest and the Cascades. And just for that reason, because it's almost impossible to find a place to stay in any of the big parks if you're going to be camping out. Now, what Harry was doing, of course, was something completely different. I mean, you talk about getting away from everything and everybody. That is the way to do it. And if you've got some experienced guides like Rick French and Jama, that's great. But I can easily imagine how I'm almost kind of surprised that Harry didn't come across a skeleton or two of somebody who would ultimately lost their way.
Wow. Annie says that Bryce Canyon is neat if that hasn't been mentioned. She likes Bryce. It is a very wonderful park.
I'll piggyback on Harry too. I mean,
people have received, Jill, you in particular, you've said it's crazy what the Williams family is doing, but it was in Canyonlands that it all started for me when I was a park ranger there for a summer in 1997. So yeah, Canyonlands, southeastern Utah is amazing. You should go
Wow.
multiple times.
Uh-huh. Have you taken your family there yet, Todd?
We haven't been back to Canyonlands. We went to Zion and Bryce about 6 years ago and went canyoneering there.
Okay.
And I lived in Utah later for a year at a boarding school teaching
Okay.
when I was an adult teaching at a boarding school.
Fun.
But yes, it's definitely crowded. It's much more crowded than it was 20 years ago.
I'd like to explore it all some more. I will say, I think that a lot of the conversation is over, but I want to say this is my last meeting or my last program as the program chair, and I'm very grateful to Katie for taking over this role for the future. But I'd like to thank so many of you who brought ideas to me again and again. Some of you were on a committee for a couple of years, and then after that, you continued to bring ideas which helped me bring these programs to the club. And I thank you for that. In the future, I was going to introduce you to Katie, but she had to run out tonight to do something. And her picture is in the Genesean, so you can find her there. But I'm sure she'll offer some great programs next year. And it was a pleasure and an honor to be the program chair for 4 years. And I thank you for that.
Thanks for the wonderful job you did, Jill.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you, Jill.
You're welcome. All right, well, you guys have a good night, and thank you so much, Harry and Todd Williams family, Tara, Wyatt, Oliver, and Ben. Thank you, guys. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jill. I mean, I know having been a part of 3 presentations over your 4 years, there's a lot of work that you put in the background to make sure that things go smoothly and do your part to make sure everybody feels comfortable. So thanks for all those efforts over the many years you were involved. Don't go away. Don't go too far away.
I won't be going away.
Just 3 weeks off for the wedding.
Yeah. And thanks, Dave, for all your support to make these things happen.
Yep, lots of people involved.
Yeah. All right. Well, good night, all.
Good night.